first prop. Can you hear me as well now? Or can you hear better this way?
Oh, yeah.
Right. How many of you saw the Northern Lights? How many of you used your phone camera to see them better? Right? Okay. Our human bodies can pick up an awfully lot. And we're so thankful for these six senses that we have. But there are ways that we can enhance that. And that's what these folks are going to help us do tonight. We're so living in a time where we can learn things. I'm so anxious to find what AI is going to do with ghost hunting. I think that's going to
It's going to be amazing.
more and more fun. But what I'd like to first talk with you about are some of the things that with our human bodies, with our senses, and you know I said six senses, with our senses, that we have stories that people have been able to detect things. 200 years is a long time. It's a long time to us, and I know some of you think I'm not quite that old, but I can remember when Blakeley was in private hands, and you could just walk and metal detect. It was all a public, with permission from the owners. So I'm pretty old, but I'm not 200. But there are presences that were here 200 years ago when this was an active town. And their spirit, their energy, their emotions are still here. 200 years is nothing to the dimension that we are not in touch with our human bodies. 200 years ago, when this was just a territory, and there were people who were interested in land development. There was a man named Josiah Blakeley who petitioned the state of Alabama to be able to develop a town here. And he did indeed do that. And when he got permission to do that, the legislative act, actually, it was a part of Mobile County because the boundaries of Baldwin County have changed a lot through the years. And at that time, Josiah Blakeley, who had been living on Blakeley Island in Mobile, bought this land from the Chastain and hired an architect to lay out the plots here. Now, not very long ago, like within the last 20 years, I had somebody tell me that they saw a horse coming up this road without a rider. It had a saddle, and it was not running, but it was just walking along the road until it got down to almost the harbor and then just disappeared. Wow. As I was reading about the history of Josiah Blakeley, I found out that he was indeed thrown from his horse and killed while the town was still not quite to reach its prime. And I've also had people tell me that the horse came back, and that's how they knew to go look for Josiah Blakeley. And as they got close to him, they could hear moaning, and they could hear help, help, help. And today, as you walk those trails through the woods, we're not sure exactly where because it comes from different places at different times. We hope that you get to hear help me and moaning and help me. Because Josiah Blakeley wants to come back here and see. Now, years later, or during that time, we were also under we were in a territory, and our Judge Tolman, who was actually based across the river at Fort Stoddard, would come here to hold quarterly federal trials, and you've probably seen the jury oak, the ruins of the jury oak as you came in. The jury oak stood there for years and years, and Judge Tolman would sit on a branch, the jury would be seated on the ground nearby, and trials would be held there until the courthouse was built. Sometimes people say that tree is the home of many sounds that they can't really determine what they are, because that's what lawyers do. Right? Not real sure what they're saying, and they're shuffling around there. But there are other people who have said they have heard the word sentence to hanging there. Now, after the courthouse was built right over here, where the covering is, and I do hope you've had time to walk around that. You can see part of the herringbone brick of the floor. The courthouse, after the courthouse was built, the bottom floor, which was partially underground, was the jail. And the second floor was the courtroom and offices. And actually, that courtroom was still in use during the Battle of Blakeley, even though the town had died at that time. Was pretty much a few homes here, but most of the town had died. But the courthouse was still in use until after that in 1868, when it was moved to Daphne. The jail was on the bottom floor. And old Miss Doris Allegri told me that the reason they did it was there so they wouldn't have to worry about people escaping from the basement as bad, and there were windows way up top. There's a story about the iron bars on that jail cell, and I have friends who are still looking for them today, because at the time that this courthouse was moved to Daphne, the jail doors were taken to the jail in Daphne, which is where the Nicholson Center is today. The jail doors were moved there. Then when the courthouse moved to Bay Minette in 1901 and the jail was built there, they were moved to that jail, these strong iron courthouse doors. Here the story gets a little foggy, and people are trying to document, because I know people that have seen those doors in storage, and many people tell me that they are the same ones that are now in the Fairhope jail, which is the Fairhope Museum, and they were there. I do know that there is someone who has possession of the key to that. I have a friend who works at the Fairhope Museum as a docent, and also was there usually closing up. One night, just as he was closing up, he heard the doors slam shut, and he heard a voice cry, "You've got the wrong man. You've got the wrong man." And at the same time, later, he compared notes with the park ranger here, and at that very same time, at 5 o'clock on a certain day, the ranger heard a loud crash right here outside of the courthouse ruins. It hadn't even been excavated at that point. He heard a loud crash and the ground shook, and he swears he heard a voice saying, "You've got the wrong man." Wow. That man was sentenced to hanging. And so they put him on the back of the buggy, pulled him right across over to the hanging tree, which is right here, which I hope one of our settings are there tonight. And the man was standing on the back of the wagon. And the hangman, my husband, who is a purist historian, told me that the art of making a hanging noose is not as simple as winding rope around. There is quite a skill to it. And if it's not done correctly, the person will choke to death rather than break his neck. And so it's a slow and painful death. But if it's even done with less talent and discrepancy, it can decapitate the person. And in this case, perhaps the person who was the noose maker was realizing something, and as he wound the noose and put it around the man's head, they slapped the horse, the wagon ran out from underneath, and the man was indeed decapitated.
Oh, geez.
But before he died, before they slapped the horse, he had said, "You have the wrong man. And nothing will ever grow under this tree." After his decapitation, and the body was there, the head was decapitated, but the eyes were firmly fixed on the executioner. And to this day, people say that at that point, the executioner killed over dead as well.
Wow.
And there were 2 bodies to bury in the cemetery. Soon after that, the famous itinerant evangelist, Protestant minister named Lorenzo Dow. Hope you've heard of Lorenzo Dow. If you haven't, what a colorful character he was. Circuit riding preacher went around and held revival services wherever he could. And as he stood in this town, he said, "This town is condemned. It will die. There are no churches here. And every resident will go to hell and will breathe fire forever and ever and ever, and this town will die." Not long after that, the yellow fever epidemic set in. And at the time, many people thought perhaps it was the curse. The yellow fever was the curse from Lorenzo Dow because there was no church. And mothers who took care of their children often sat by bedsides and children saying, "Mama, Mama, it hurts. It hurts, Mama." And in some of these homes here today, you may still hear that cry, "Mama, Mama, it hurts." And as the town lost its members and many were buried in the cemetery there, perhaps the souls are at rest and not burning in hell. And I hope that we get to hear some voices that perhaps have been listening to us tonight. Because 200 years is not that long. It's not that long in the dimension we don't understand. And may we now take pride in helping these people find resolution if they are wanting to reach to us, so that they know we understand and we care. And that might be all it takes, is for them to know that someone cares.
Awesome.